I will be reading two scriptures this morning. The first is Isaiah 57, verses 4 through 8. You have no desire for truth in your courts, and none of you testifies truthfully. You rely on empty pleas and lies. You conceive oppression and give birth to sin. You hatch adders' eggs and weave spiders' webs. Those who eat their eggs will die because what is hatched is a viper. Your spider's webs are useless as clothing. No one can use them to cover themselves. Your works are deeds of iniquity. You commit acts of violence. Your feet rush into crime. Quickly they shed innocent blood. You have nothing but harmful ideas, leaving a trail of havoc and ruin. You don't know the way of peace. Your paths are not paths to justice. Your roads are crooked roads, and those who walk them never know peace. Our second reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verses 41 through 44. Coming within sight of Jerusalem, Jesus swept over it and said, "If only you had known the path to peace today. But now it has been hidden from your eyes. Days will come upon you when the enemies will encircle you with rampart, hem you in and press you hard from every side. They'll wipe you out and your children within the walls, and won't leave one stone on top of another within you, because you failed to recognize the time you had, a time of your visit from God." Ancient words from our tradition, read for our present day understanding.
Didn't Eddie do a good job? Thank you, Eddie. Well, thank you for showing up today. And if you're on Zoom, thank you. It's kind of lonely in here when there's nobody shows up. So it's good to see you all, especially in like really hard times. I'd started a series that I'm already having to jettison this week because of the shooting. And I figured that's where my mind's going to be. That's probably where your mind and heart are going to be. So there's not a lot to say. You can't come up with words that make this make sense. But maybe just being together and caring has a kind of healing effect. We put out on our electronic sign, does the Second Amendment trump the Sixth Commandment? Expected a little feedback from that. I mean, I believe in the wall of separation between church and state, so I don't want commandments being foisted on people anyway, but that was addressed to Christian nationalism, where people claim to be followers of Jesus and yet are like unrecognizable when it comes to things like kindness and stuff. So we got one feedback, somebody saying it's too soon, always, right? Too soon, and it's politicizing this tragedy. And you've heard the response. It's because they took prayer out of school. Which is very strange. I mean, if God was doing the shooting, then say, please stop it, God. But if we're doing the shooting, and if it's the culture and the mindset of a nation, then we just need to be repenting. We don't need to be giving advice. And when people say it's too soon, here's the problem with that. It's the 146th day of the year. We've already had 212 mass shootings. When isn't it too soon? It's hard to take that in and to realize that we have tried the path of violence, I think, as far down the road as you can go. We have more of our citizens in prison. We wreak havoc and hell on people in the border. Our economy is based on exploiting and extracting from other parts of the world. And whether you're liberal or conservative, you probably don't want to hear that. But to realize when we look at Donald Trump, this isn't political, this isn't partisan. We're seeing a mirror. We're seeing the dishonesty. We're seeing the greed, the selfishness, which has been a cancer in the bloodstream of the United States since our founding. Wouldn't it be good to take a different path? Because we certainly can. And certainly as a church. We're looking at today that passage, which has always been very powerful to me, where Jesus is starting to come into Jerusalem. You have all of the celebration stuff, but before he comes in, he stops to cry. Because he looks at Jerusalem, he looks at the country he loves, he looks at the religion that he loved. He was never left any of those things. But he realized how every one of them had sold out to the problem. I forgot, I have slides. Someday I'm going to get this down, I think, maybe, but don't bet money on it. So, okay, so this is the story of Jesus weeping. Next slide. This comes from a convenience store within a mile from here. It's a Christian cross with guns and bullet holes in the cross, which I wouldn't think would make Jesus too happy. I wouldn't think. How did white evangelical Christianity get to this? Where some of the loudest voices justifying the violence that has seized our country is coming from churches, in particular white churches. So Jesus wept. And he said, Jerusalem's going to fall. The nation is going to fall. There won't be one rock on top of another rock. Now, I'm going to try to get some good news out of that, because I think there is good news. Because Jesus wasn't trying to get people to be good religious people, good patriots. He was trying to get them to be good human beings. And a good human being, a decent human being, an ethical human being is a citizen of the whole world. Your sense of justice doesn't begin and end at your own boundaries. And it doesn't begin and stop at your level of class struggle. It includes everybody. And it's love, it's compassion, but it's love in practice in the form of justice. And that's where Isaiah, Jesus is when he says, you didn't know what makes for peace. He didn't finish the quote. Isaiah finishes the quote that it's justice. It's justice that makes peace. You can't just get the tools of violence and protect peace and expect justice to come out of that. When there is oppression, there cannot be peace. An economy based on exploiting other economies around the world cannot know peace. So the way out is to repent. And when after a sermon like this, people say, well, where's the hope? The hope is repent, right? Change course. Nothing is forcing us to be like this. But we have to step out of that system, that mindset, that false religion that goes by the name of Christianity, that sells out every point on the Sermon on the Mount, every one of them. You lift up the Sermon on the Mount, you don't ever hear these white Christian nationalists quoting Jesus, turn the other cheek, share everything. You never hear money's the root of all evil. That's kind of an interesting biblical verse that kind of gets left out of the conversation. But the good news is not if we keep going the same way, everything's going to get better, because it won't. The good news is if we change course, we can yet save the nation. But even if we can't save the nation, we can be good stewards of the world population. Because what's good for America is not necessarily good for the rest of the world. So I think the good news is it's saying if you let go of the things that are killing you, you can find life. So I hear Jesus saying 3 bits of good news, but to be good news, we have to look at ourselves differently. The first thing I think that Jesus is saying that most Americans aren't agree with is that violence is not true power. This is Memorial Day weekend. I'm very grateful for people who risked their lives or gave their life for our freedoms. But I'm very sad that so many of the people who have died were actually fighting for corporate interests elsewhere. And it's false patriotism not to ask the question, why are we going to war? Once you're on the battlefield, you can't do that. And you're not really asking the question if you don't ask about the economic system. Who profits? With the weapons industry, who profits? Who's getting rich and who's being impoverished? Those are important questions. We see those pictures. I think we're still this slide, but go to the next one. Okay, we're almost there. This is foreshadowing. It's brilliant technique. I think you'll agree. How did this worship of flags and guns infest the Christian church? Because it's a cancer. How did it get there? Have you ever noticed that the Bible Belt, if you put the chalk line around the Bible Belt, it's suspiciously the Confederate States of America? Isn't that kind of interesting? You trace it, and it's basically those southern states. So is it a surprise when people from that worldview are calling for states' rights? Is it a surprise when people that profit from the weapons industry say, well, you just need more prayer? Prayer in schools. You can pray in schools, you just can't force other people to pray. So Isaiah's talking about this. This is nothing new. This obviously goes back to Jesus' time and before Jesus' time. This is the prophet Isaiah. And a prophet wasn't a fortune teller. A prophet told you the unpleasant truth. Like the prophet said, if you keep going in the direction you're going, you're gonna get where you're headed. Right? That doesn't take a whole lot of talent. If we keep emptying our economy into violence and let children suffer for lack of nutrition, where's that going to end? How can anybody even put the word great and America in the same sentence if infants can't get formula? If it's easier to get a gun than infant formula? What is great about that? Listen to the words of the prophet. They hatch the eggs of vipers. Now, isn't that kind of the libertarian viewpoint? It's each of us for ourselves. And if we maximize selfishness, then that'll work out well for everybody. That was called in the Christian text, brood of vipers. And I don't think it's name calling. If I'm only for myself, I cannot be your friend, not a true friend. And even if I don't know you, I owe you that as one human being to another. So Isaiah said that. He says their cobwebs are useless for clothing. They cannot cover themselves with what they make. Think how much of our focus goes into things that don't feed, clothe, bring health care, nurture the planet. See, that's insanity. It was insanity with Isaiah. It was insanity with Jesus, and it's insanity today. He says, the way of peace they do not know. There is no justice in their paths. They have turned them into crooked roads. No one who walks along them will know peace. That kind of says it, I think. So we're there. Now, I think it's a mistake to see ourselves as victims of this brutal violence. That's not what Jesus is calling us to do or to be. We are being called to be catalysts of change, of a new age. And it's understood this is going to happen in community. See, that's one of the missing elements in modern American society, is just community. Somebody who notices a teen who's troubled and notices they just bought 2 automatic weapons or semi-automatic. Don't come to me after the sermon to say AR-15. I don't care what the nomenclature is. Please. They're military grade weapons that have no business being in anybody's hand, much less an 18-year-old. So this idea of the silence of the lambs, where Clarice is talking to, that's Jodie Foster's character, is talking to Anthony Hopkins' character. He was Hannibal Lecter. She was Clarice. And she's talking to him, and there's this sense of realizing he's not coming from a place that's a normal human being. Right? This is a predator. And he's looking for victims. We have to realize there's that element in the United States. That doesn't mean you have to hate anybody. Doesn't mean you have to hurt anybody necessarily. But to realize that when we act like democracy is intact, when voting rights are suspect, that's naive to the point of insanity. That's like you're playing poker and somebody's cheating, you know they're cheating, so you want to keep going till you get your money back. Not real smart. If people cheat in elections, then it's going to take more than political organizing to counterbalance it. Political organizing is very important. Voting is very important. But we're going to have to hit the streets. And we're going to have to support the activists that have been working, all along to change the world. This is all a part of what love looks like in practice. In this verse, it sounds like it's saying, the Messiah came and you didn't spot it, so now you're in trouble. And that's one interpretation. I don't find that very convincing. The word that's used there for visitation is the word episcopal in Greek, which means bishop, overseer. So another way to understand this passage is you didn't realize when your duty came, when your chance at ministry came, when your chance came to stand up for other people who are in harm's way, and you just got numb. You just sank in despair. It's very understandable. But why not give your life courageously to your highest value? If you're going to die anyway, why not say, I'm going to choose hope every time. I'm going to live out of my highest value, win, lose, or draw. You can't change the insanity of the world, but what if we did that in community and supported each other? And when somebody burned out or got depressed, that was okay. If we're in community, we can step back when we're tired or wounded. Somebody else can take our place until we find our courage again. Yvonne graduated from middle school this week. When you feel helpless, don't forget that you helped that happen. Right? You help provide a place where an undocumented refugee who is being sought by the government to be deported graduated from middle school. And you want to hear the most ironic thing of all? He won the Good Citizenship Award. I hope somebody from the Biden administration notices that. What does it mean to be a good American? To have lots of flags, lots of guns? Or to believe that every person deserves the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? Those are two different Americas. And I think people have been serving the wrong America too long. Let's get back to the Declaration of Independence, that we want a city on a hill for all people. We want an ethics that doesn't stop at the boundary. And we want leadership that's not for sale. And you cannot do that within capitalism. By definition, you're doing your value equations by property rights within capitalism. It doesn't mean that you can't use some of capitalism. And I know people don't like to hear it, but I think this is what Isaiah would say. You cannot have a system of greed and save the planet. It will always be more cost efficient to pollute than to clean up, right? That's simply math. It will always be more cost efficient to deny medical care than to provide it. But here's the problem: what goes around comes around. And a disease in some other part of the world doesn't see your boundary. And so corrupt power destroys itself. And that's not true in the short run. It's not true necessarily in your particular lifetime. But over time, when you give your life to this long struggle, going back to Isaiah and before, for the betterment of humankind, when that's what your life is about, when you're going to pass your little torch down the road, when hope means giving yourself to your highest value, when it means choosing your hopes and not your fears to steer by, then the rest of your life, regardless of what happens in the external world, can be one of peace and value and dignity. But you have to reject the American empire to get to the American dream. And you have to reject the imperial Christ of European theology to get to the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, one more. I got kind of worked up today. Sorry about that. Where are we? Yes. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? That is the message that you and I have to take out into the world. It's what Isaiah said, is what Jesus said. America will never know peace. Will never know peace until there is justice. And that can be anywhere in the world. There's a wonderful, this is from Canada. So they're not real Americans, but they did a conversation with different First Nation people, indigenous people. And this has a quote, you've probably heard some of it before, but I'd never heard all of it. It goes, Canada, the most affluent of countries, operates on a depletion economy, which leaves destruction in its wake. Your people are driven by a terrible sense of deficiency. When the last tree is cut, when the last fish is caught, when the last river is polluted, when to breathe the air is sickening, you will realize too late that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money. Kind of hard to argue with, isn't it? So here's the thing. Neither Isaiah or Jesus was asking you to be the Lone Ranger. You get tired, you get afraid, you get discouraged, all that thing. But what if you found a community of people who said, I'm going to, whenever I can, whenever I have the courage, I'm going to give my life to my highest value. And when I get too tired or afraid, I'll step back and you'll step in. And watch for me. We all get weak. We all get afraid. But what if a community did that? I believe that's what the early church was, which leads us to our next. The symbol of the ark now, I don't believe that really happened, but I believe it's happening all the time. That there are times when you can't save the whole world. So you save the piece of it you can. Your own soul, your family, your friends. Those who say yes to this calling are your true family at a time like this. That idea of coming together through the storm was one of the major symbols of the early church. Not to come together and just pray, God, please take guns out, but to change the world, to be a catalyst for change, to be an agent of change to the extent that you can. The rights we have came from people who lived courageously in hopeless times. You understand that? You received a torch from people who are in much worse shape than you are. How can we not take it up and give it to the children of the future? So, these are my struggles with the text. I think it's good news, personally, if you say yes to it. I think it's simply hard news if you say no. We are made for each other. You don't have to believe in God, believe in evolution. Our lives intertwined. We are cells in a common body. You have a calling. Whether it comes from God or biology, those are technicalities. You can live a life of nobility, of peace, and of joy, no matter what happens to this country. If you say yes to that calling, if you realize that violence is not true power, that this nation is being killed by the things it's using to defend itself with, just like the dinosaurs, we're dying of our weapons. And second, that we don't have to be victims. If you give your life to your highest value, you can be on your deathbed and still change the world in some small way. Coming from kindness, coming from love when nobody else is, telling the truth when nobody else is. It changes the whole equation. You may not live long enough to see the difference that you make. And then finally realizing that there is no peace without justice. That sharing the world fairly with everyone all across the globe is the first step towards the world that we all hope for. I want to close with a song we did in class today. And I don't think when your country's falling to fascism, this is really kind of hard to believe, but staying in touch with your kindness, your humanity, is where your power is going to come from. So this is a song by Nancy Lamott. First 3 verses. So many things we can't control. So many hurts that happen every day. So many heartaches that pierce the soul. So much pain that won't ever go away. How do we make it better? How do we make it through? What can we do when there's nothing we can do? We can be kind. We can take care of each other. We can remember that deep down inside, we all need the same things. And maybe we'll find, if we are there for each other, that together we'll weather whatever tomorrow may bring. I leave you to your own reflections on these words.